Welcome. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I
That's
got my
right.
green on.
Top of the morning to you. Okay, I think we pretty much covered what's over here in the in this. Do you want to say anything else about house rules?
Nope. Just if you haven't been with us before, if you have any questions, ask them in the Q&A, or you can unmute and say, "Excuse me, I got a question." And if you put them in the QA, one of us will see it and hopefully have an answer for you. Since Mark isn't here, ask your questions, and we'll try to see if we can answer them. Most likely, we won't be able to. So in that case, we're going to have you put them on the evaluations.
So today's presentation is building an Excel type application with maintain. When you guys have seen me build simple applications, a lot of times I put the records in a table up top and allow the user to make a selection. Once they select, they can update the fields in that record, or they could delete the record. They can also use those fields on the bottom to include a new record. But what if you have a user that really likes Excel and really wants to be able to enter and update and delete multiple rows at the same time? That's what we're going to do today. In maintain, we have an object called the grid. And the grid is what we're going to do because it will allow you to display multiple rows of your database and let the users update those fields and add new records. Our finished application will look like this. We have all the fields from a slightly modified movies file, which I'll explain in a minute. We have all of the fields from movie code to copies, but then we also have two other columns, a delete flag and an update flag. I'll explain how to build those in a couple minutes. I've taken the movies file and used it to create my move SQL2 file. Move SQL2, as the name implies, is an SQL file with one key, also the movie code. But I've taken the A6 movie code and made it an I6. I've also made it field type equals R. I did this so it would become an auto increment field. And when you look at the access file below, you'll see that I have that. Field type movie code is now an auto increment yes, start at 1 and increment 1. Every time we include to the database, the movie code field will increment 1. So we don't have to worry about it at all. So give me a second and let's create a brand new application in App Studio. Okay, so in our Focus Friday directory, because that's the one I'm using now, let me just get rid of that. I'm sorry, 1 second. Okay, so, sorry, still waiting for App Studio to return. Give it one more, okay. In our Focus Friday directory, we will say new HTML document, next on this screen, and then finish. We will have a brand new HTML application, HTML page 6. And from here, we say new embedded request, new maintain data. You'll notice now we have our template, our canvas, and our maintain code. I'm going to ask maintain to use the data source. Click new and select movies 2. Click OK. Here is our maintain code, and this whole application really doesn't use a lot of it, but in order to not make typos, I'm going to grab the code that I've already written. So let's start with top case. Our top case says the first thing we want to do is change the no data character from a dot to a blank. The sysmanager.folkset command is really a very powerful command. It allows the maintain application to make changes to focus system variables. So in this case, I'm changing node data. This is so if the user is going to enter data into an empty cell in the grid, there won't be a dot there to have to remove first. We're then going to perform loader and show form 1. Now, application is only going to have one form. Let's look at case loader. Let me grab that. Now, loader is going to do a bunch of things. The first thing it does is make sure that the cursor is at the top of the database, because we're actually going to hit this procedure more than once. We're then going to clear all stack and load all of the records from the database into all stack. Now, guys, I only put 5 records in this database. That's so the screen wouldn't get too full. I'm then going to do a loop through all stack. Again, I think it's only 5 rows, and add the delete flag and set it to N. This is so when the form displays, the delete flag will be set to N for each row. And I'll explain why I've created a delete flag in a couple minutes. Finally, I'm going to create an update flag called upFlag, which is also an A1. And I'm going to do a really cool trick here. For those of you who remember, allStack.FoCount. FoCount is the default variable that tells you how many rows are in a stack. By adding 3 rows to it, I'm creating 3 blank lines in the grid. This is so the user can enter rows as well as update existing rows or select to delete them. Okay, we're going to do the rest of the code before we get to the form, so we can do it all in one fell swoop. So let me grab the case process. And this is where, the magic happens. After the user, this code is used to load up the table. But once the user presses our process button, we're going to do 3 functions. We're going to clear our include stack, update stack, and delete stack, and use infer to create them. We're then going to copy from all stack into include stack, where movie code equals 0, but title isn't equal blank. What this will mean is that the record doesn't already exist in the database, but the user entered a value in title telling us this is a new record and we want to include it to the database. We also have our update stack, and we'll copy all the records from all stack into update stack where the update flag equals Y. If update flag equals Y, that means the user made a change to the fields on that row of the stack, and we'll see how to do that in a couple minutes. Finally, we'll have our copy from all stack into del stack, where delete flag equals Y. And once again, I'll show you how delete flag or del flag can become Y, and we delete from that stack. Finally, we reload the stack and the form redisplays. So this is all the maintain code we need for this entire application. So I'm going to parse it to make sure everything is proper and my functions, my stacks, my data sources were looking good. Let's go back to our canvas. First thing we need to do is drag form 1 from requests and data sources onto the canvas. I'm going to say no for the multi-page container. I don't need this for now. And I'm going to expand this to this whole width of my screen. So there's our canvas. Next thing we need to do is put all stack onto our canvas. So I'm going to right-click all stack, drag it up to the top corner, and say create controls. On line 1, the control type, I'm going to change it from edit box to grid. All the other fields append to above, and not only the database fields, but my 2 computed fields of del flag and update flag or up flag. That's important. So let's hit OK. And all of our fields are created. I'm going to delete this all stack text from the top. I don't need it. I don't like it. Okay, now it's gone. We need to make a couple of changes to the columns in the grid. So in order to do this, we click on the grid to highlight it, and we select the settings panel. I'm going to pin it. You'll notice we have the header, which is what displays at top, the name of the field, which is the stack and the field name, and we have our selection to, which is very important because if you make a change, you need the selection to go back to the field in the stack. Now you'll notice this is automatic. When you create the grid by dragging the stack onto the canvas, it automatically puts the names and the selection to. Okay, first thing we need to change is the movie code field. Since movie code is a key, we want to go down to the bottom of the selected column information and change false to true for read only. Because again, movie code's a key. We can't update it. We can't change it. All we can do is add or delete to it. Now we want to go to del flag. And I'm going to change the text of del flag to delete. It's a little bit difficult sometimes to make a selection of this field. I usually click once and then click again, and it opens up. So with delete flag highlighted, I'm now going to make it read only. And I'm going to make its width, let's say 45. One last thing to do, we're going to change up flag, also make it read only. And I'm going to change it to 45 as well. Okay, so we're doing great. Let's unpin this and take a look at what we've done. We now have our stack. We have our delete column. We have our update flag and all of the fields. We need to tell maintain what to do. So let's add a button underneath. And we're going to change the text to process. It's not going to be update. It's not going to be delete. It's not going to be include. It's going to be all three. So I'm now going to expand my functions folder and drag the function process onto the button, assigning it automatically to the click mode. We need to do one more task. So let's bring up our tasks and animation. We see task 2, which is the one we just created, but we need to say load. Remember, when the application runs, the HTML form is displayed. But in order to get the maintain to run, you need to assign run request, request one, connect. And we're almost there. So right now, we're getting close, but we have to do a couple more things. And this is going to be done with the JavaScript. So let's click on the grid, display the properties, and click on the lightning bolt. These are all of the JavaScript functions we can do when working with the grid. So we're going to double click on cell changed. You'll notice there's cell change and cell changed. Cell changed is when the value in the cell changes. Cell change is when you move up, down, left, right, or to a different cell in the grid. So let's click on cell change, and you'll notice my embedded JavaScript tab opens. Let me get my code, because especially typing JavaScript, I don't want to make a mistake. So what happens when the user makes a change to any of the columns in my grid? I'm going to take column 11, which is my update flag, the row, which is being passed in the function, and change the value in that cell to Y. When we start the application, it's blank. But if the user makes any changes, we use cell set text for grid 1 to change the value in row 11 on the selected row to Y. True just tells it, okay, we're good. Okay, let me delete. Oh, okay, hang on. I've added the control characters, so let me delete some of these control characters, because otherwise we're going to have function grid 1, function grid 1. Okay, let's get rid of these. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that looks right. Begin function, function var, var. Okay, think we're doing all right. So now we want something else to happen also. We want the user to be able to click on the delete flag. So let's go back to our properties of the grid, and we're going to double click on left clicked. And in left clicked, we're going to add this code. If column equals 9, which is our delete flag, and the user left clicks on it, we're going to get the value that's in that cell using cell get text. Again, we're passing in the column and row. If the text value is 9, we're going to cell set text to Y. If the text value is N, we're going to set it to Y. If it's Y, we're going to set it to N. So in this way, we can toggle that value. And guys, I think that's all we need to do. So let's run. Let's see what happens. Let's see if we get it right on the first time. Hopefully this won't take too long to run. I probably should have saved it first, but okay, we'll play dangerously. We're thinking about it. All right, one more second. Here we go. All right, let's make this smaller. Oh, okay, I think I made a mistake on the update flag. I think I made it way too wide. But okay, let's see what happens. Let's change JAWS to JAWS 3 in 3D and tab out. Now, what happened? You'll notice the update flag went to Y. We'll change Dog Day Afternoon from a comedy to an action movie. And also, the update flag gets changed. I'm going to decide I really don't want the Smurfs in my database anymore. So I'm going to left click on delete flag and it turns to Y. Finally, I'm going to add a new movie. What was really, I really liked Top Gun this year. And it's action, and I don't remember who the director was, so I'm going to take credit for it. Make it PG-13. It came out 2022, let's say over the summer, and wholesale price is going to be $50, and list price is going to be $75, and we have 5 copies. So watch what's going to happen. I'm going to press process now. What I'm hoping will happen is JAWS in 3D will update in the database, the Smurfs will be deleted, and Top Gun will be added. Again, I currently have movie code of 0 here, so let's see what happens. Well, I think it all worked. JAWS in 3D is now here. There's no value for Smurfs, and Top Gun has been added to the next sequential movie code. And I could do that for any of the fields, for all of the values. And if I do look, what probably happened here was in the settings panel for the grid. Oh, sorry, I have to go back to the design tab. I probably made my update flag 400 up to 85 instead of 45. All right. Well, guys, that's really the demo. We have this now full function grid type application, which can be used for update, include, and delete. Now, this is pretty basic. And one of the reasons I like to use single edit fields instead of a grid is for data validation. So as the developer, you may want to add input validation for any of these fields, especially you might want to check a date field or check the value of an integer, and all of that can be done in the back end in JavaScript. You can absolutely validate the format and the values of a field, especially if you wanted to make sure a date was valid using JavaScript. You may also want to use drop-down boxes instead of letting the user enter. For things like category and rating, these are known sets. So you can include drop-down boxes using HTML by coding the HTML into the grid cell. If you really wanted it to be Excel-like, you could create roll-up columns for sums of this whole column or this whole column, any integer. We could easily create fields and use the maintain code to roll up those values in these fields. Also, a real easy thing to do would be to put sort code behind any of these fields. We would just have to see if the selected row is 0 or -1 for the header, and we'd be able to sort up or down for any of the fields there. Oh, another thing that would be really cool is the ability to act on all columns. Let's say you want to change the list price of everything all at once to $40 or $50. We could put a checkbox here and put a button that says update all columns. You could give it a value. If you wanted to give a % raise, anything like that, we could operate on all columns at once, all rows at once using maintain code. The only thing that I've never really gotten good at was putting a date selector in a grid cell. If anyone could ever come up with a really cool way of doing that, I'd certainly like to know. All right, guys. So maintain applications can be created to perform almost any functions. I personally like to create applications that allow users to select a row of existing data and operate on it. But if you ever need to use multiple rows for input, update, and delete, we have the grid object to do it. And that's what I wanted to tell you guys today. So I hope you enjoy the rest of Focus Friday. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Mark. Right. If you have any questions, you can put them over in the Q&A, or you can add them to your evaluation. We'll take a look at them. Mark will certainly take a look at them when he gets back, and we'll respond to them. So it's kind of interesting. That's the first time I think we've done that, and it clearly works okay. Walter, over to you.
Over to me. Let's see. Not my PowerPoint. Okay, that's all right. And let's try to share. Okay, am I sharing? Do you see me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to talk about debugging today, because we're finding that there's a lot of new people that are being exposed to Focus or WebFOCUS and the language. And this is basically just a primer. These are some simple things you can do in order to try to troubleshoot your code when you're creating new code. Now, if you're using the tools, you don't have as many problems because the tools take care of the syntax and making sure things are working. So that's a benefit of using the tools. But if you are more comfortable doing your own coding, unless you're like Mr. Blood, your code's not going to work the first time.
Ah,
I give you kudos. So these are some of the techniques or commands we're going to look at. We're going to talk about the echo command, what's a dialog manager versus a non-dialog manager command, check file hold. We're going to go into all these, so I'm not going to go into them now. All right, so we're going to start out. We have a report that we're trying to create. And this is what we want to see. We have a report of everybody who has a salary greater than 54,100, which happens to be Erwin Fernstein. So we want to know who's making more than me. Not that this will happen in the real world, but it's a good, funny example. But how do we create this report? So here we're going to table file emp data, where we're going to print the first name, and we're going to reformat it and only print the first character. We're going to do salary. It's going to be by last name. If last name is equal to Adams, because Adams also makes that particular salary we're looking for. And we're going to put it to a hold file called mySave. Then we're going to read the file we just created, which should have the one record because it's for one employee. And we're going to skip 16 characters and then read the salary value, because if I'm looking at this query correctly, I have last name and then first name initial basically should add up to 16. So that the salary should start in the 17th position and be 9 characters long. Then I'm going to table file emp data again. And this time it's going to be salaries greater than amper salary, the value we read from the hold file. And we're going to print last name, first name, salary by department, where salary is greater than amper salary. Now, does anybody see any problems with this other than art? I didn't think so either. So let's run it. So we run it and we get this error. Error at or near line 14 in procedure set up for Summit. So you could tell this has been, this is kind of an old presentation, because when was the last time we had a Summit?
3 years ago, 4 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a while. It says dialog manager, dash read failed. Check file def or allocation for dash read mySave. So that's telling me that I'm doing a dash read, but the file that I'm trying to read, WebFOCUS doesn't have any idea where it is. It hasn't been allocated. It hasn't been file defed. But we shouldn't have had to do that, right? Because it was part of a hold. So here's the code again. We're doing an on table hold as mySave. Well, this is where dialog manager versus non-dialog manager comes in. Anything that starts with a dash is a dialog manager command, and it will run immediately. Anything that doesn't have a dash will go on what we call a stack. So table file emp data, print, first name, salary, all the way down to the end just goes on the stack, but nothing's happened with it. I see Mr. Art has raised his hand. Yes, Mr. Art.
Or you have,
Typing something in, it's not a problem. Let me finish typing it. Just go right ahead.
Okay. So the table through the end gets put on the stack, hasn't been run yet, therefore I don't have a hold file yet. So there's no mySave that I can read. So how do I fix this? Well, we stick in a dash run. The dash run says run everything that's in the stack, and because it's dialog manager, it's going to happen before the dash read. So now I do have a hold file, and the dash read will, the file will be there available to read. Okay, let me just check something here. Because if Art's typing something, I want to be able to see it.
definition from an MFD, so I don't have to specify formats.
On the dash
Question
read
mark?
statement, you have to specify A16 and D9.
All right, hold that.
Okay. Okay.
Let's not jump
Oh,
ahead.
yeah, there's a complete, yeah. Yes.
See, this is when you have somebody who knows what they're doing better than you on your presentation. Okay, so we had the dash run, the file's there, this error goes away, we run it again, and lo and behold, we get another error. So this time it says unrecognized format of the AMPA variable. Okay, well, I have an A16, which is when I'm skipping 16 characters, and my salary I know is a D9 because that's what the master says. So why are we getting this error? Here's the code. So because it says the error is on a format, and I have two fields that have formats on them, we need to isolate which format it is. So the first thing I would do is put an echo. The echo says, show me the command, and I'm doing echo equals all. It's going to show me the command in Dialog Manager, and then it's going to show me the command with the variables resolved. So when I do that, basically nothing's new here. We still get the problem in the dash read. So the next thing I would do is separate the values, skip one versus salary. And to do that, I would just kind of put salary on its own line, make it a comment, and put a dash exit at the end of the dash read. So this way, if I have another 100 lines of code, I don't want them to run. When I have an error, it's probably not going to run anyway. But just to be safe, I want to stop right there. So if I run this now, and I don't get the error, and if you see at the bottom, I didn't get an error, then I know that the format error is in the second variable, the D9. Okay, so extra credit. Again, not art. Why do I have ampersand, vertical bar or concatenation, salary? Why did I put that vertical bar in there? Anybody know? So the vertical bar is there because if I have amper salary and amper salary didn't have a value, we would get prompted for it with the auto prompt. The putting the vertical bar in between then says, well, the ampersand is its own ampersand. It doesn't treat it as a variable. So if it has a value, there's nothing there to have a value at this point. So you're just concatenating basically an ampersand with the literal salary as opposed to a variable amper salary. So it's just there. So if you're running in WebFOCUS, it stops you from getting the auto prompt. All right, so the problems with the salary, the D9. So what's happening? The only formats that we allow in Dialog Manager are alpha and integer. And even then, if you have an integer, it gets stored as an alpha. There is no such thing as a double precision format. There is no such thing as a date format. There is no such thing as a packed format. So knowing this, instead of a D9, I can just make it A9. As long as I can read the value, everything's okay. All right, Marina asked the question. I'll get to you in a minute, Marina. All right, so we change it to an A9. We run it. And this is what we get. Dash read, my save, skip, salary A9. Okay, everything's better. Now I have salaries greater than Peter. Whoa, 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 what's going on here now? This is supposed to be a value. This is supposed to have the value that we're looking for. All right, so we get an error. Field name or computational element is not recognized, Peter. So let's see what's happening now. See, now this is why you should use the tools. So if we look at this, we're doing an on-table hold as my save. We got salary. My save is the result of a hold. So let's check the hold master. Because if I have a hold file, I have a master, as opposed to having a save. Saves don't create masters or synonyms. So we're going to create this include called checkmast, which has check file my save hold as my check. And then we're going to table file my check. We're going to print the field name, the alias, the format, and the actual. Now, you could also put in a question mark FF. So it's question mark, no space, and then FF, and then a space, and then your hold name. So in this case would be my save. And it would give you the same information. It's the field names and the formats. So when I run this, notice I have last name, 2 first names, and 2 salaries. But I only have 1 first name and 1 salary. So what's happening here? Anytime you do a reformat, so in this case, we have first name / A1. That's a reformat, and we call it formatting on the fly. You could have done a define and got the first character. If you did that, you wouldn't have this problem. When you do a format on the fly, you're going to get the original value, and you're going to get the recalculated, reformatted value. And that's where the 2 fields come from. So in this case, first name is going to be twice, first name, full name, and first name A1, and also salary will be there twice. And how far ahead did I go? All right, so to fix it, we have a command that says hold list equals print only. So then this will only put in the hold file the things that you're printing. So if I have things like 2 formats or reformatting, then I'm not going to see 2 of them, I'm just going to see the one I want. So in this case, we had on table set hold list, print only, run, read, and hopefully we're done and this thing is going to work. But of course it's not. And believe me, these kind of things happen a lot, especially when you the first time around when you're dealing with holds and dash reads. So now I get an error. Computational element not recognized, and a C with a goatee or something going on there. J question mark. All right, so what's happening now? So we're going to add a dash type, and we're going to dash type the variable and see if we can figure out what's going on. Okay. So I'm going to dash type the value for skip is &skip, the value for salary is &salary. And then again, I put a dash exit in here to stop it right there. And I get Adam's P, which is what I expected, and then the salary.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it doesn't look right. So what's happening is because it's a D format and you went to a hold file, it maintains double precision value. So in this case, we probably have more than 4. So there's 4 digits that you're seeing, but you can't read them. They're binary. They mean nothing to you. So what we have to do is save the salary field as something you can read, as alpha. So how can we do that? Well, we have a couple choices. We can say on table hold as my save format alpha. Or we can do on table save as my save. Okay, see the difference? The one we're keeping it a hold, so we still get a master file generated, a synonym, and we're telling it I want format alpha. The other one is a save. Save doesn't generate a master, and it will save as format alpha by default. So when I do that, this is the resulting checkmast. Here's the resulting checkmast for the my save. Actually, there is no master, so nobody jumped on me on that one. This is what shows when the save file is created, we tell you where the fields are and what the links were, and that will be available in the view source. All right, so now hopefully we have everything fixed. We have a salary, we have something we can read, and lo and behold, we finally have a report. Yay! Any questions?
Doesn't amper salary in the where statement have to be enclosed in quotes so it doesn't think it's a field name?
Doesn't amper salary? No, because since it's numeric and salary is numeric, it
Right.
will not.
Yeah, but a where statement is field could be greater than or equal to field. How does it know that 54100.00 isn't a field?
Because it's looking for a numeric value, so it's not going to look for ticks.
Okay.
That's only for alphas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Come on, Art.
Okay. It's been a while.
All right. I did say that there was something else that. Here we go. So Art alluded to, is there something I can do since I'm going to a hold file that would make life a whole lot more easier? Well, instead of going to the hold file on the left, so we're creating the on table save as my save. We're doing a read my save. That's all working. We got that all squared away. But on the right, I'm keeping it as a hold. And I'm not saying format alpha. So the hold file is being generated with the double precision. So the wonder here is dash read file as opposed to dash read. Dash read file will let you read any file that you have a master for. And all of the fields then get read into amper variables with the same name of the field. So if you, in this case, we're going to do a dash read file my save. So you're going to have an amper first name, amper salary, and amper last name available to you after the read. When you have double precision or packed or dates, all of the conversion is done for you. And that's the wonder of doing a dash read file. So if you're writing something new, you should always use dash read file. Dash read reads bytes. Dash read file knows how to convert the bytes to values. Correct, because it uses the master as the map. Thanks, Art. All right. Here's another example. So we're done with that. We're done with that report. Everybody's happy now. But now I have dash set amper echo equals all, file def all CRS disk, and then I have a path. And then I do table file all CRS print star end. And when I run this, I got no lines of output, even though I know that there's data in the file. Now, depending, or hopefully none of the current versions of WebFOCUS, you should see the old behavior, but the old behavior actually would have gave you an error that said that your file wasn't allocated. But in the newer versions, you just get no output. So let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. So I have a file, I'm trying to table it, I got no records. Let's just make sure there's data in the file. So we're going to do a dash read. Dash read, we're just going to read the first line and get the first character, just to see if we see something. Value is missing for amper line. So no, it didn't find anything. There's physically no data according to this. So let's look at the file def. Oh, there's 3 G's in debugging. There should only be 2. Once you fix it, now I see my data and everybody's happy. Did it work? There we go. All right, any questions on that one? I'm working on upgrading Focus 739 to 7703. Okay. There's a join of a hold file to a fixed file where 739 is not picking up a numeric value on the fixed file and setting to 0 instead, whereas 7703 is getting the numeric file. Is there a way to debug?
Join hold file to fix.
Okay, so this person is going from this is mainframe focus. So let me just touch on it just a little bit. Between 739 and 7703, that's kind of a big jump. And 7703 didn't have caching turned on yet. Kenneth,
Oh.
do you have a case? Because if you have a case, then maybe we can take a look at it that way later. Or if you don't, maybe you want to open a case. And just put in there that you mentioned it on the Focus Fridays of the Walters, and that way somebody will let us know that it came in. Okay, thanks, Ken. All right. Some other things you can do for debugging. So we've seen massive procedures, like thousands of lines, and a case gets open. Oh, I'm having a problem. Well, where did you try to narrow it down for us? So that's where the go to, and we already saw dash exit, where those things come in. Because if you can isolate it to just one table out of your 50 tables in your requests, it makes debugging a whole lot easier. All right. So you do a dash go to, and then you give it a label, and then it transfers control to the label. Don't use embedded blanks for the label name or the name of any other dialog manager command, basic rules. So in this report, we have a bunch of go to RPT2, and then go to our, then we have a bunch of exits, and a lot of this is commented out. So if it ran okay, you got table 1, table 2, or RPT1, RPT2, RPT3, and RPT4. But you can then control the go to, uncomment out the go to, and say just go to RPT2. And notice we also uncommented out the exit. So it's going to jump from the first line to the dash RPT2 line, run table file, run report 2, and then it's going to stop. So this is a way for you to control where in your code things are going. I generally will put a dash skip and a dash go to skip. All right, so we saw the set amper echo equals all. We also have a set. There's a set def echo. The difference between the two is the dash set amper echo equals on or all only happens for the procedure that it's in. So if you are executing something from procedure 1, procedure 2 that you're executing will not have the echo. If you set def echo equals on or all, then any procedure that you run anyhow, anywhere will then get echoed. So if you have a lot of things that you're doing a bunch of includes, you're doing a bunch of executes, then you probably want to use def echo, because then you'll be echoing everything as opposed to just the one procedure where you turned it on. Okay, that's basically all that's saying. So off is the default, you get nothing. If you turn it on, then you only get the echo of the commands, and if you do all, you get the commands and the resolved amp variables.
Do you want to tell them about none?
Go ahead.
There is an additional value for setDef echo, and it was added in order to prevent end users from using this to crack your code or break in and see what's going on. If you set it to the value none, it will prevent echo from working, period. And in some cases, that's exactly what you want to have happen. You don't want somebody able to use to basically to insert an echo and find out what's actually going on. If you set def echo equal to none, echo will be disabled until the end of the session. Okay.
Very good. Read limit, record limit, read limit. Maybe I should have Art explain all this, because he's very intimate with read limit and record limit.
Yeah, read limit just controls how many records are physically read from the external device. Record limit says how many past records should I read, should I display or treat as acceptable.
So that's the intended usage of read limit and record limit.
Right. If you say record limit equals 1 and you get 0 records, it will go through your entire file. If you say read limit equals 1, it will only read the first record and stop.
Right.
Right, but somewhere they changed it, and even though you have a read limit, it still goes through the entire file. So the intent is read limit says read n number of records, whether it meets your criteria or not. Record limit says only give me X number of records that meet my criteria.
The read limit limits actually the number of calls to the interface. So if you're dealing with SQL, any request is only one call to the engine. So the engine does the processing, but you issue only the one call if the read limit equals 1. So that's why you get everything.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the next bullet. If you're doing a relational, we'll translate that to whatever the appropriate limiting factor is in that database. So for Oracle, we would translate it to where row num is less than or equal to n, if you did a read limit of n. For DB2, we pass it as a fetch first n rows only. Okay. And how are we doing on time?
It's 12:29.
All right, I'm almost done. All right, so this is our third and final example. I have defined file car. I'm creating a field called blank, which has one blank in it. I'm doing a table file. I'm doing a compute profit, which is retail cost minus dealer cost. And then I'm shifting things over with my blank field. And then I'm doing retail cost, dealer cost by country. I'm doing a PC hold format PDF. I'm using styling, and I want the font color for retail cost to be blue. So let's run it. And this is my output. I don't see anything blue in here. So this one takes a little bit more understanding of what's going on. Remember I said if you do a field name slash format, a format on the fly, it creates two fields? Well, we will also include in the matrix, the internal matrix, the folk sort, any fields that you reference in a compute, whether you print them or sell them or not. So what's happening, and I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit. We got table file car, we're summing compute, retail cost, and dealer cost. So right off the bat, you're going to add retail cost to the matrix, dealer cost to the matrix, and profit to the matrix. Then we have blank, and then we have retail cost again, and then dealer cost again by country. So how can we try to resolve this? Just go back. All right, so retail. So we use the field name here, retail cost. Here I changed the field name to the column offset. So I'm saying this is column 3. So if I look at the sum, I have the compute. This should be column 1, the blank column 2, retail cost column 3. So now I run it this way. No difference. So the final thing that we're going to do is we're going to set the background color. So I'm going to set the background color to red. And notice I have a column that's red now, which is my blank as tick tick column. So this is really column 3. Retail cost would be column 4. So now that I understand exactly where that particular column is lying, I can change it to N4. Now, there's another thing you can do if you want to use the retail cost field name. You can put in the styling column equals retail cost, open paren, and then either a number to tell which reference of retail cost you want. Remember I said from the compute, it gets added to the matrix once, and then it gets added a second time. So I could have done retail underscore cost open paren 2, or if you don't want to be concerned about which number you're looking at, just do retail underscore cost open paren asterisk. And then any reference that it sees of the retail cost on the output would then get the blue font. All right, oh, I guess I wasn't done. So these next slides just talk about the SQL traces, the SQL DI, the SQL AGGR, STM trace, SQL call. The main ones you're going to use are the STM trace and the SQL AGGR. You want to see, was this aggregated, was this optimized, and what the translated SQL is. So the SQL AGGR shows you, yes, this is what, this is if I was able to aggregate or not completely, this is what I was able to transfer. And if it couldn't, it'll tell you why. And then STM trace is the translated SQL. So to turn them on, set trace on equals all, or set trace off equals all, because we set default traces to start with. So you just want to turn them all off, and then set trace on the SQL AGGR. The / client says I want it to go to the view source. Do the same for STM trace, and then we do a set trace user equals on. In this case, I get a message aggregation done. That came from the SQL AGGR, and then I have this select statement. Notice though, on these particular statements, I have a date, I have a timestamp in front of the select statement. So I can't really easily just cut and paste this. So we have another setting, set trace stamp. You turn it off and it turns off. Now I can cut and paste this and put this in a native query tool without having to worry about editing it. All right, so that's all the stuff we went on over. One final report. One final thought. Download a current copy of the manuals, especially the using functions one. I access that several times a week. So we have creating reports. It's good for define and table. Describing data is good for your master and access files. Developing applications is good for Dialog Manager. And then using functions is for all the wonderful functions we have out there, which keeps growing. All right, that's all I have. Any other questions? All right, so Kenneth is going to open a case. Marina, I guess you'll get with me later on yours.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
All right, so Marina's question is, should I expect problems running these Dialog Manager commands? So she's running a -Unix.
For the clips, it's just a general, approach, kind of. In case I will need to, kind of.
Yeah, you can shell any Unix command.
Right.
I don't know if I would put the dash in front of it though. I would just do Unix or just the bang sign, the exclamation point.
Oh, really? Yeah, okay, exclamation, I remember, but okay, I wasn't sure. Thank you.
And then you can issue it.
That stacks it, so you'll need a dash run following it.
Yeah, it won't run immediately.
Okay, got it.
Just remember that each Unix or each operating system command that you issue is in its own environment. So it creates its own shell.
Okay.
So you can't rename something to one thing and then, so that'll happen. But yeah, you can't kind of like stack commands. To do that, you'd have to create a batch file.
Right.
Or a shell script. And then call the shell script.
Okay. Right. Yeah, that's better. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comment? Also, I want to see that. Also, don't use the same name label multiple times and watch your dash includes. Yes. If you use the same label more than once, we're going to go to the first one we see. So, and in fact, I'm working on something right now, and I did that. And I'm like, why am I going into this infinite loop? Yeah, so don't do that. The newer versions all have limits, so that if you do go into an infinite loop, after I think 1,000 Dialog Manager commands, it'll stop.
It's called set loop limit? And
there's a lieu limit and a stack limit, right?
Right. Yeah, and you can set, they're both set to 1,000 by default, and you can reset them. It's interesting because we document that you can the default for looping inside of dash repeat is 1,000,000. So you might run into a little bit of an issue there, something to keep an eye out. And I'll talk about this in a little bit.
Okay. Any chance dash set amper echo equals all can be made available in info assist?
Info assist would require dialog. The dash set, that's yeah,
that's primarily for dialog manager type things
right.
and variables, and you don't really do a lot of that.
No, there's
info
no dialog
assist.
manager interface there.
So most likely not.
No. And even the set commands. I think set commands are the other thing that people are very interested in. And set def echo is not a dash set; it's a set. And I think there is work being done on exposing some of that in Designer coming forward. Obviously, if you can get into App Studio or if you can get to the console and the web console and work over there, either in the older versions or in the new version where you've got access to Focus there, you've got a lot more functionality available to you, and it makes it a lot easier.
Gregor's has a question: is it a solution to capture result of dash Unix echo to dialog manager amper variable? Now we do have an amper variable called retcode, which will give you the return code of the command. It doesn't give you back any results of whatever you did was doing. What I do is I will redirect the output to a file and then do a dash read on the file.
Right.
No, read.
That's correct. Correct. Exactly. Okay. All right.
All right. So let me stop sharing so Mr. Blood can finish.
All right. Let me share. And I'm going to do, I think it's going to be on screen 2. So let's go over here. And let's do this. There we go. Right? You can see that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some dialog manager stuff. We're going to extend a little bit of what Walter was talking about one command in particular, the dash repeat. Dash repeat and basically is designed to solve a number of problems. Okay, we use repetition, and we can use repetition for these kinds of problems. I need to perform the same operation or the series of operations 6 times. All right. How do I do that without actually coding it 6 times? Do I have to code it 6 times? No. What do I do if I have to perform an operation a variable number of times? I don't know how many times I'm going to have to perform this particular operation. It may be 1, it may be 10, and I'm not going to know. It's going to be somehow, it's going to be data related, and I'm going to be able to detect it somehow. How can I do that? I want to issue, obviously, when I work with data, I have to file def my files. I have to give it a handle that I can work with within the language that we have, the focus language. How do I issue a variable number of file defs? I'm not quite sure what the user is going to be working with or what I'm going to be working with. I want to be able to just automatically detect what I've got and issue file defs for that. How do I do that? Again, the concept being variable. How do I dynamically change the number of focus files I'm working with? Right now, focus files don't necessarily require a file def. They're typically done with a use. They can also be done, you can also point at them with an access file. Now, either way, if I have, for instance, I've been collecting data files and focus files, one file for every day. all right? And it's a transaction file. I keep it, and I want to be able to report off of it. But every time I run this report, I only want the most recent 7 files, right? So how do I do that? And can I do that with, how do I do it? Yeah, well, there's a way to do it. I want to create a request with a variable number of fields, each of which needs to be renamed. Can I code that particular concept once? In other words, and how do I affect the stack that I'm working with? Now, when we're talking about repeating operations, we're talking about creating a loop, all right? And we have to specify the beginning and the end of the loop. That's required. We also have to control the number of repetitions, all right? And that number of repetitions could be fixed, all right? It could be a fixed number. I could know at the beginning of the request or every day, you know, as I just mentioned in the case, whenever I run this report, I want the most recent 7 files, focus files, the transaction files. I don't care, you know, if it's Saturday, I want Friday back through last Saturday. Whenever I run it, I want the most recent 7. It could also be a variable number. And that could be either passed in somehow. We could detect the number of files that exist in a certain place. And then I want to, if I'm working in a library and I say, oh, look, let's see how many files there are over there. And today there are 15 files in that library, and tomorrow there are 26. How do I make sure that I get all of them? And a repetition, the ability to be able to repeat a variable number of times, obviously, is very important. Now, the loop contents. What can I put in this loop? Well, my immediate operations are the dialog manager operations, the dash. Dash repeat itself is a dialog manager operation, all right? And it executes immediately. Now, we also have stackable commands. Now, when we're working, we use Dialog Manager to navigate and also to build commands that we're going to submit to the engine to run. And we can do that. And when we're working with a variable, and I want to build a request that has a variable number of fields or a use that has a variable number of use statements, obviously, I can stack each one of those using some sort of a repeat command, and then follow it with a dash run, which will in effect take the stack, everything that I put on the stack, and execute it, right? Which is the way that Focus works. Focus collects commands and executes them when it hits a dash run or it hits an amperet code or something that forces it to run. Now, for a long time, the way that we would do this would be to use the dash set command. And if the thing about the logic is, this is the basic logic. We set up a counter, we start a loop, which basically means we set kind of some label to indicate the top. We do something. In this case, we read a record. And then we go and we do some sort of a test. Are there any more records to read? If yes, we go back and we read the record again. We read another record. We do that until there are no more records, at which point we stop the loop. All right. That's the basic idea behind what a loop is going to look for. And we can actually do this very easily in Dialog Manager and Focus. I'm going to initially here start up by actually defining a file that I'm going to use as my source. In this case, I'm going to set up a couple of variables. The first variable I'm going to set is a variable to capture the record. I wanted to get a record, so I'm going to set up a variable to get that record and put it into. I'm going to then set up a counter to actually control the loop, because the loop is going to start someplace. Now, I set the counter at 0 when I'm working with just set because I have to increment the counter, and I have to put the increment of the counter inside the loop. So in order to get the first record, I need to put the initialization of this variable outside of the loop. Okay. Once I've gotten that set up, I can start the loop. All right, I set up a label, which is the beginning of my loop. In this case, I use loop. You can use anything. At which point, I then start to increment my counter. I set counter equals counter plus 1. And you can do this very nicely. We don't have a problem with this. This will allow us to increment it. My first number will be 1. And I will then literally do a read of the lookup file and put it into an amper variable called A11, all right, or A1. Now this A1 has a length of 1, and it's going to go into a concatenation of A and the counter. Now having done that, I can then check and see if I got data when I did that read. All right, and that's what amper IO return does. I need to do some sort of a test on my loop to determine whether my loop is done or not. Have I finished? As long as my IO return is not equal to 0, then I'm gonna go to, I will go, as soon as my average is not equal to that, I'm going to go to done. Else I'm going to go back to the top. I'm going to go back to loop and run this thing again. All right. And that's basically, I'm doing the test and the navigation based upon this test, based on the amper IO return. Now, once I've done that, I'm done. That's the end of my loop. All right. And I've just created a concept, and you can do this with, obviously with dash set, and you can get as crazy as you want with it. All right. What you do within the loop is entirely up to you, and you can get it as crazy. It can be as crazy or as complicated as you need it to be. There are a couple of things, obviously, that you have to pay attention to. Looping within looping, you have to pay very careful attention to that. You also have to pay attention to the fact that you do not want to create a situation where the loop never stops. All right. And that's something that we did, in fact, add 2 things to the product, which you may end up having to override because the limits are actually too small. Set stack limit and set loop limit were both added in to prevent runaway tasks. The only problem is 1,000 is not necessarily a runaway task. If I'm doing our dash read through a 1,000,000 row table and I'm looking for specific things, I do not want to be limited by my, in this particular case. So you have to watch those. If you do find it kicking out, you just go set loop limit to a much higher value, and the problem will disappear. All right. Now, dash repeat was added to the product quite a while ago, and it was added to simplify the looping situation, and it actually does that. It creates and executes the loop. It will execute to the target label. It will execute a fixed or a conditional number of times, and it will end when it has executed fully. Or you coded a safety exit, either a dash quit or a dash exit, or a dash go to jump outside of the loop in case. And there are some cases where it's really advisable to put a dash go to in, and we'll get there. Now, can you do a dash repeat from within a dash repeat? Yes, you can. Be very careful. All right, because this generates an enormous amount of activity. You can do it as long as they're totally contained. The label names have to be different. Obviously, you can't go to the same label. Otherwise, you'd never finish. All right. This is a doable quantity. If you're going to play with it, test it first and test it on a small amount of data. Be very careful. This is the kind of thing that can get into a very large amount of loops. So now the syntax: dash repeat, label, n times. All right, very simple. Instead of all of that if logic that we had to do and the sets to set up the loop, now all we have to do is basically say point at the label and the number of times we want to repeat. We point at the label, which is the end of the loop, and we indicate the number of loop executions. And I can use a local variable for that n, or I can use a local or a global variable or a constant, all right? It's only evaluated once. Now, here's another simple case where I'm going to use repeat. I'm going to repeat this particular case 4 times, and I'm going to repeating to done. And then now I'm going to read a record from the input, write a record to the output, and I want this done 4 times. Very straightforward. I can do that very simply now. Once I've got my file, I put a file def in here so that we can actually see where we're getting data from. I simply have to indicate I'm going to loop to done, dash repeat done 4 times. I'm going to loop it 4 times. My operation in this particular case is a dash read, no close, input, and an ampere A, which is a 10 bytes long, an A10. And then I'm going to type ampere A out so that we can see it. All right, very simple. In this case, here's a case where I'm going to do this on the mainframe, similar kind of a thing. I've got my .m, which is what we use on the mainframe, basically to do a file def allocation, the same as an allocation. I'm going to dump the car file into an alpha hold file so that I can work with it. I have my dash repeat 5 times. I'm going to hold it into car hold. I'm going to write it out to another file called car out, which is what I have allocated up above. And then I'm done. Now, if I actually go out and take a look at the file that I just wrote, this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to have 5 records in it, because that's all I took, and it's the first 5 records that I've written in the file, that I read in the file, written directly to this other file. So this is a very easy way to repeat, to generate a loop and set it up, right? Now, the conditional stuff is where life gets interesting. There are 2 ways to conditionalize this thing. The first is with the repeat label 4. And what repeat label 4 lets you do is to specify a variable, which will be a counter, and to specify the starting value of the counter and the ending value of the counter, and the number of steps that we have between the values. I can step 1, which means I'm going to take every one. I can step 2, means I'm going to take every other one. So I have a way of setting us up to do some very complicated reading. My from val is a constant. My default is 1, and I can set it to any number I want. To val is a constant. My default is 1,000,000, and as I said before, watch out. You may get hit by a loop limit, in which case you just go back and set loop limit to 1,000,000 or to whatever number you need. The idea here is that it will let you read through a very large file very quickly.
Well,
yeah.
I think Art has a question.
Shoot. I can't see it. What's the question?
Art?
Arthur? Turn on your mic.
No, Art.
I was just questioning, you may be getting to end repeat and exit repeat?
Those are dialogue manager. Those aren't dialogue manager. Those are modify.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome. For those of you who are familiar with modify, we have the repeat command available also. Thank you, Art, for bringing that up. The repeat command is also available in the modify syntax. And repeat does pretty much the same thing. It allows you to repeat sections of modify, the end repeat indicating the end, and the exit repeat being a way to exit the loop that you've actually set up and created. Now, I think I talk about repeat when we talk about modify, and that'll be coming up later in the year. I'm sure I'll be getting into some modify so that you can see how. But the concept is the same. How do I repeat something without having to recode it? Or in the case of modify, how do I execute something multiple times and do that dynamically? So I build one case, and I want to use that case in another case in some sort of a repetitive loop. Okay. The ampervar is our counter, all right, and you can name it anything you want. It's just going to count. It's just going to count the number of iterations that we're doing. It's tested at the start of each loop, and it's incremented by s, that step value, every time we execute. All right, so that if I start out on 1, if I say my step is 2, I'm going to skip the next one, and I'll read the next one, do the next one, but I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm going to ignore that value. I'm going to go to the next one, which would be the second one, the 3, and I'm going to operate on that. The execution goes between the from val, greater than or equal to the from val, less than or equal to the to val. All right, and your step is a constant. It's the increment value. It defaults to 1, but you can actually do anything you want with it. You can also set it to a negative. So if you want to count down, you actually can do that. You can set that up. Now, let's go take a look at what this actually looks like. Here's a little layout on this, the repeat 4. You can see that we've got the from to set up. The testing that's being done effectively is on both the upper level and the lower level and the upper level. All right. Now, simple case. I'm going to set up file lists for both both files. In this case, I'm going to read from input. I'm going to read from lookup and output to write out to output. My repeat is done for. I'm using amper_b as my amper variable. It can be anything, and you don't have to set it up. It's automatically set up by -repeat from 2 to 5, which means I'm going to go from the second record I read. I'm going to skip the first one, and I'm going to go 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that's done. As soon as I've read 5, I've completed. In this case, I'm stepping 1, so I'm reading 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to read, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the lookup and then write to the output. And I'm no closing there so that I make sure that I can continue to write to it. Notice that when I'm done, I'm going to close the file, and that's generally a good idea. If you're working with -write, always -close the file so that it's done, so that you do it elegantly, so it doesn't do something nasty like drop your last record. Okay, now there is one more way to do conditions, and this is the one that I find the most fascinating. It's the while condition, because the while condition is probably one of the most dangerous things we have. The while condition invites you to create an infinite loop. All right, and you have to be sensitive to what you're putting in there because it's pretty easy to create it. The condition will, as long as the condition is true, the loop is going to execute. So be careful about the condition that you're putting in there. Now, what is the condition? The condition is basically some kind of an expression. All right, and it can be any kind of expression. You can do all kinds of things. Let's take a look at an example. My repeat while. Notice I'm not doing any testing until after I've done my operations. All right. In this case, I'm doing a read, and a write. At that point, after I've done my write, I'm going to check my IO return. All right. And if my IO return is not equal to 0, the file's still there, I still have data, yes, go back and do another read. If it's 0, I'm done, exit. All right. And that's obviously the thing you want to make sure that you do, that does happen. You do not want to set it up so that you don't have an exit. And that's the thing I always worry about. It's the most important thing. Notice that when we use this particular one, we have to use a semicolon at the end of the expression. All right, and that's true. All right, look out for infinite loops. You can set loop limit to a lower level. And the other thing to do is you can build into your operation a test counter for an exit. All right. You don't have one automatically generated here, but you can certainly create one, and you can force an exit based upon a counter that you're actually incrementing during the process of doing this repeat. So you have a way of exiting if something goes nuts. If, for instance, if you're looking for, if you're expecting there's an incremented value in your data that you're reading and you're expecting it to hit a certain point, at which point you'll drop out, you'll exit. Well, if for some reason it never gets to that value, it will continue to read. All right, and if something that created the value, or if you just didn't understand the data well enough, it will just keep going and going and going. In which case, what you want to do is to build in some sort of an exit that basically says, okay, and you can do this with a dash set. You can do a test to see if the last value is equal to the, for instance, you can check to see if the last value is greater than or less than the previous value, so that you can see that it's not getting higher because you expected it to get higher. You could do that to basically determine whether or not the direction is not going the way you want, in which case you could just say, okay, go to exit. In other words, you jump out of the repeat loop, the dash, okay. All right, only got a few more. You can also, and there's the other thing that we've been talking about, just using it with dialog manager operations. This is also a very powerful tool when building a command or operations that you want to do, or stacked commands that we want to do. For instance, when I build a table request, when you build a table request in WebFOCUS or you do it in Focus, you're basically setting commands, table commands on a stack. And when you get to the word end followed by a dash run, you will take all of those commands and send them into the engine, at which point it will run. So you can create anything you want up to that point, and you can be as creative as you want with it. In fact, WebFOCUS is wildly creative with it. And you can get even more creative than you think. WebFOCUS limits you to certain functions, certain constructions, and once you get in if you get into the air coding your own or building your own mechanisms to do this, it's quite interesting what you can do. I can build a repeat in here to collect field names, which is what I've done. I've got a file out there that basically has the fields that I want to include. It's in lookup. I'm going to do a repeat loop on that to the point that I don't see anymore, and I'm going to take that. I'm going to basically use. I'm going to create the LCA word on the _a, and I'm going to create an as statement. I'm going to lowercase the field name, all right? Because right now all the field names, especially on the mainframe, are uppercase. So I want to basically create a command. _a will be my command because it's going to be the field name as _as field, which is going to be the lowercase version of that field. Right. Simple. You can get creative here. And you can see the commands that are stacked. You can, Dialog Manager is very powerful to do this kind of stuff. And a lot of the work that's done in WebFOCUS is done using Dialog Manager and under the covers to basically generate the requests that you want to actually end up running. Now you can create and stack focus commands. You can do the table, left, match, graph. Obviously, those are all the obvious ones. You can also do it with join, with use, with filedef, with dynam. I wouldn't suggest it with modify, although there probably is a way to do that. Modify initially, when we first came out with it, had a compilation possibility. That has been removed simply because it was too big. It was no longer necessary. So now it's no longer compiled. It's executed just like table is. The entire thing is set up and then it's sent into the engine to be interpreted and run. So you could conceivably do that with modify if you really wanted to. Now, so where can you use this? As we've seen, dash read or dash read file, dash writes, dash types, stacking commands. You can use it with filedefs for files, with uses for focus files, fields in a define for generating different fields, table requests for verb objects, for sort fields, for, believe it or not, selection criteria. You can even, if you really want to get creative, depends on once you follow it, you may actually want to say, okay, I've just done this request. All right. I've held it as an alpha file, but I really need to the user. I've allowed the user to store it in 3 or 4 other formats. So how do I do that? Well, one quick way is to just do a hold as after the request, and hold as a different format, hold as a file name, whole format, whatever. And you could literally build a loop around that to pick up whatever the end user has suggested he wants. Excel, he wants PDF, he wants CSV format. You give him whatever he wants with a very simple little loop. All right. And that's it. Dash repeat. Very powerful. Cool command. All right. And any questions? I can't see them.
Art has some comments. Well, stop sharing and then you should see.
All right, let me do that.
On a dash repeat increments, the increments happen at the end of the loop.
Correct. That's right. The increment is at the end of the loop. The test is done at the beginning.
The ending value test is greater than, not greater than or equal to. I guess it would depend on if you're doing a while.
Well, that's a good question. I'd have to check that. I mean,
and until will probably be greater than.
Otherwise, a dash repeat from 1 to 1 would never execute.
That's a good point. Well, does it execute? That's a good question.
Yeah, because you do it
think
one
so.
time.
Well, you don't. It's going to default to 1 anyway. I mean, you don't have to have a from value or to value. If you default to 1, actually, if you don't have anything, it's going to be 1 to 1,000,000. All right, by default. If you specify 1 to 1, the other thing too is, and I'd have to see how this actually works. You can step negatively, so your starting value can actually be it could be higher than your to value. Now, I'll dig out an example of that. There's a way to actually go backwards.
And I've done from 1 to 0, and
yeah,
it never processed the repeat.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
All right. Anybody who knows Art, you can just give him a shout out.
Arthur, thank you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you guys too.
All right.
I'll try and be here more often.
Absolutely. We show up every month. Next month, I don't know, April 15th? No. I don't remember what the date is for.
It's the third Thursday, right? Or third Friday, right?
It's the third Friday. We've done the third Friday, so it could be
1, 2, 3, 21st.
21st. Okay. All right, folks. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, please, when you exit, go to the evaluation. Let us know how we're doing. And we look forward to seeing you next time.